young ladies and gentlemen, it is very, very tense between President Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. Today, in London, the famous meeting, the last chance meeting, has started. The plan that the United States of America proposed is a plan against which Ukraine has stood up. Of course, this was to be expected. We had to elaborate on that. The remarks made by Volodymyr Zelensky have irritated and annoyed the American President Donald Trump in more ways than one. Very irritated, very annoyed, Donald Trump made statements that sufficiently prove that it's over. The United States of America is certainly washing its hands of this Russo-Ukrainian affair. The situation has reached its conclusion, its climax, dear ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump is very outraged. So in this video conference, that's what we are going to talk about. But before continuing, I ask you to share this video conference. It needs to be shared as much as possible. Share it in all possible groups. Give it lots of likes. The situation is very, very serious. And we, Africans, must closely follow what is currently happening. So, what did Zelensky say? Zelensky said that Ukraine was not ready to recognize Crimea, annexed since 2014 as a Russian territory. Here is Zelensky's statement that ignites Donald Trump's heart. Donald Trump considers this statement incendiary. Why did Zelensky have to say this to him? You know, in the Ukrainian constitution, the issue of the inviolability of borders is paramount. That is to say, Ukraine must not, under any circumstances, agree to cede its territory to any state. So for a long time, Ukraine has said that there is no possible negotiation on Crimea. That is to say, it even surpasses, it goes beyond the Ukrainian constitution. Zelensky cannot. Zelensky had said it, he had insisted on it. This is how Zelensky took his position. Now, in the plan, the new plan that America proposed, that Donald Trump proposed, which had leaked, and whose 7 points were published by the newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, which we discussed in the morning here on the platform of Awakening of Consciousness. Among the 7 points, one of the essential points, is that Ukraine must recognize Crimea as Russian territory. Then, that Ukraine refuses to join NATO, meaning everything that is in favor of Ukraine, America has cut off. Yes, obviously because Donald Trump wants to respect Russia's demands to quickly achieve peace. But many observers say that Donald Trump is a poor negotiator since during his first term. He did not succeed in any negotiations. So he wants to go quickly. Zelensky says no. So it's from there that Donald Trump speaks up. Please share this video conference with me. Donald Trump says this. He says, no one is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory. But if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for Crimea 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a single shot being fired? Crimea was received without a single shot being fired. He doesn't stop there. Donald Trump asks why didn't Ukraine fight to reclaim Crimea? But it's not. So according to Donald Trump's words, it's not America that gave Crimea to Russia. And for more than 11 years, Crimea has been reclaimed by Russia. What is Ukraine doing if Ukraine really wants Crimea? So, Trump continues. So, It must be said that Trump strongly criticized the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for stating that Ukraine does not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. And you know that it was London and Paris who told Zelensky to recognize it in practice. To recognize in practice means, yes, we acknowledge that Russia occupies Crimea, but not to formalize it. And it is this advice that Zelensky followed. So Trump says this. He says, this statement is very detrimental to the negotiations. So he says, it is precisely provocative statements like those of Zelensky that make resolving this war so difficult. He has nothing to boast about. For Ukraine, the situation is disastrous. It can achieve peace or fight for another 3 years and lose the entire country. That is to say, Donald Trump says that the situation is disastrous for Ukraine. That is to say, Ukraine has the choice. Either let Crimea go, achieve peace, or refuse peace and engage in a relentless struggle. That Ukraine fights for another 3 years. But by the time those 3 years end, Ukraine will have lost the entire country. But when Donald Trump says it, he is realistic in what he says. So, having said this statement is very detrimental to the peace negotiations with Russia. Crimea was lost many years ago under the presidency of Barack Hussein Obama, and it is not even up for discussion, meaning during the discussions, Crimea is not even on the table. So Donald Trump wonders, where does Zelensky get this idea from? Donald Trump continues and says, no one is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory. But if he really wanted Crimea, why didn't they fight for Crimea 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a single shot fired? He added that the main Russian submarine bases had also been located in the region for a long time, meaning the Russian submarine bases had been established in the Crimea region for a very long time. Yes, even before the transfer of power was made by Obama. So he says that even before Crimea officially returned to Russia, Russia had already set up submarine bases. So Russia was already controlling the area. What could Ukraine have done? Then he says that it is inflammatory statements like those from Zelensky that only complicated the resolution of the conflict. So, in clear terms, Donald Trump says, he says that Ukraine is facing a disastrous situation. He says, I have nothing to do with Russia, but I want to save the 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers who die every week for no reason. Since obviously it's 5,000. The total number, it's 5,000, who every week at a minimum go to their eternal rest. So, Donald Trump is so worked up that you can't imagine. So ladies, young ladies, and gentlemen, here's the headline news. We will return with more news related to this London summit, as it is truly the headline. And we are witnessing a new turn, a new dimension of the conflict. So, ladies, young ladies and gentlemen, that was the international headline news. Thank you for sharing it as much as possible. I will get back to you shortly with more news. This was the voice of your one and only samurai.